welcome to another episode of Chris McDaniel's America here on the Midnight Ride Network, your home for the anti-establishment movement in this country. With me, as always, Jack Fairchild. Jack, how are you today?
I think we're having an issue with your microphone at the moment. I think they're trying to get that situated.
And if everything's cleared, if everything's squared away, we'll keep rolling.
It's good now.
Oh, I'm
it's
good.
Now.
I'm good. Modern technology and the internet, this is what occurs. It's the good news today is that the Israeli defense system did not have those same problems as my microphone. I don't know if you've heard, but Iran decided to engage today Israel, and that's a big, big fundamental step. They've been hostile for an awfully long time, and today, in response to Israel killing a leader of Hezbollah, Iran decided to lob about 180, 175 missiles, or what they call projectiles, into the state of Israel. Good news is the initial reports are that there have been no fatalities or no casualties there in Israel. The dome, the Iron Dome, did a good job at intercepting many of those projectiles, along with the United States military who assisted as well. So kudos to all of those soldiers and brave service members that were there today, doing the best they could to defend Israel from another rogue nation, Iran, and hopefully saving lives. I think it's interesting that this occurred today, considering the fact we have a presidential election coming up. We're only about 35 days from that election. And tonight, of course, you have a debate between the vice presidential nominees of each respective party, and more on that later. But what makes it interesting, though, is that in a world so unstable, it does beg the question for all Americans, who do you want in control of foreign policy? Harris has shown a proclivity not to have a strong insight into things, particularly foreign policy. I'm not sure if Biden even knows there's a war happening in the Middle East. I guess maybe someone will wake him up and let him know. But here's the thing interesting about this. There's a clip circulating of Harris. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this clip, but she was asked a short while ago about this potential of something occurring in the Middle East where Israel could be endangered, particularly Iran taking some action against Israel. This was back October, about a year ago, and they asked her specifically what her response would be to any aggressor toward Israel, and her response was, don't. Okay, that was Biden's response as well, as I remember, just don't. Today, hold on. Today they did. Today they did. And it begs the question, if a Reagan would have said don't, if a Churchill would have said don't, if a Thatcher would have said don't, if a Trump would have said don't, I wonder, would they have acted the way they did? And the answer is probably not, because if you have a foreign policy where you carry a big stick and you're willing to be an aggressor, you'd be surprised how much peace you can find in your time. But if your adversaries sense weakness, they will probe, they will test whether or not you're willing to have the resolve to fight them back. Today was a test, and Israel once again passed it with wonderful colors. You know, Israel has one of the finest militaries in the world, and they increased their strength by having one of the best intelligence organizations in the world. Mm-hmm. Israel has infiltrated Hezbollah. They've infiltrated Iran more than likely. They know more about those countries and the leaders than most people do. And it's one of the reasons they have a hard time fighting Israel, and we're happy about that. But it leads to a bigger question, okay? And this is, I think, the title of the show today. And the question is, there are people that hate those who fight evil more than they actually hate evil itself. We have a lot of examples of this over the years. Mm-hmm. Think about the 60s, 70s, even now. You have all these intellectuals particularly, and a lot of people that aren't intellectuals at all, but simply just follow trends, and they're trying to somehow find positives in communism. There's nothing positive about communism. Communism is an evil philosophy that's resulted in untold deaths of millions of people all across the globe for many, many years. Stalin, 30 million people he killed, including 5 million Ukrainians from starving them to death, you might recall. Chinese leaders in that same time period killed 60 million people. Pol Pot there in his Cambodia killed another 5 or 3 million people. In fact, 1 in 4 Cambodians was killed by communism between 1975 and 1979. North Koreans killed 2 to 3 million people. not to mention the deaths in the Korean War. Wherever you see communism, you see a long string of tyranny and death and destruction. This is not my opinion. This is the state of the world. This is where we are. And yet, despite people witnessing all of these things occurring, despite people recognizing that communism was indeed flawed, did you notice how the American left attacked the anti-communist?
Yeah.
We still, to this day, we hear the word McCarthy and we think immediately that guy was out of his mind. The left attacked him because he had the audacity to fight against communism. And it goes to the term Cold Warrior. Something else they used trying to show that people were warmongers. They weren't. They were fighting against an evil philosophy, and it appeared many in the left actually hated those people who were fighting against the philosophy more than they did the philosophy themselves. That's a strange concept to me. It's really odd. I bring it up because a question, are we seeing that today with Israel? Now, you may not like Israel. I don't know why you wouldn't. Strange. They're a functioning democracy surrounded by lunatics for the most part. They have an independent judiciary. They have an independent opposition press. They have equal rights for women, equal rights for gays and Arabs. It's not a regime. They have a constitution. They have due process. The closest neighbor we've got in the Middle East, the closest country in the world that shares our values in the Middle East. Hezbollah, Hamas, on the other hand, against those freedoms. They don't like liberty. They're down on women, down on anyone who disagrees, down on anyone who speaks against leadership. Think about it. And yet there are American liberals that seem to be siding with Hamas, siding with Hezbollah, siding with Iran, knowing that Israel is confronting known evil. I am perplexed by this. I hear about invasions of territorial sovereignty, and people talk about, wow, this is wrong that Israel is occupying this land. Whatever. What about the ideology of the folks occupying the land? Israel has much more in common with American freedom and ideals than Hezbollah or Hamas or Iran could ever in a million years. These are top-down tyrants over there that don't allow people to exercise rights, that don't value anything we value, and yet our college campuses are filled with people supporting evil. Every time I travel, I get to see a protest, people supporting evil. I guess the bigger question for us is today is why? I mean, what are we doing? There could be a psychological reason, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Is
it difficult, psychologically speaking, for people to stare evil in the face? That's a question I think we should talk about, because for the life of me, now I get non-interventionist, okay? And I get people that claim that we don't need to be involved in other people's wars. I get it. That's not what we're talking about right now. Don't conflate the two. If you had to choose a side between Hamas and Israel, which side would you choose?
Oh, it's easy for me. It's Israel.
Well,
it's insane that... Well, go ahead.
But that's just it. That's just not what we're seeing out there. Which side would you choose? One side, functioning democracy, independent judiciary, independent opposition press. One side having all of these freedoms and liberties. The other side having none, and yet the American left has chosen, once again, the evil side. Is it because it's just hard to fight evil? Is it a lack of courage? Could it be a lack of courage?
It could be.
Why is it that people fear resisting evil? Let's get right down to the heart of the matter. I am so tired of people trying to argue that fascism and socialism and communism are different ideologies. They are different in their outcomes. But the way they take over, the way they insist on control, the way they use force and coercion is the same. You disagree? Think about it. Nazis had to have their way. They didn't get their way. They isolated, they killed, they ridiculed. It's the same with the communists. They had to have their way. They didn't get their way. They isolated, they ridiculed, they criticized, and they killed people. It's the force that America is supposed to be against, the coercion. We're supposed to accept communities, accept countries that share our values. Israel shares our values, and here we are rejecting that once again. It's strange to me, and I'm perplexed by it all, because force is the enemy of freedom. When it comes to force, the Nazis and the fascists, the Soviets, the communists, they're all the same. They use force to get their way, and the individual like you, the individual like me, we're subservient to all that. Now, in this country, I guess the American liberals can understand that. I guess they think they want to be in control. They'd like to have that force. And in the same breath, they claim they're bohemian in lifestyle. They want to be left alone. They're just hippies. No, they're not. They're looking for control. Mm-hmm. But at least if you're looking for control, which I disagree with, why not do it for good? Name something positive about Hamas, Jack. Hezbollah.
I can't.
I can't either. It's perplexing, but why do people always seem to hate those who fight evil more than the evil themselves? Maybe it just comes down to they're afraid.
It could be, too, a lack of knowledge, especially when you look at some of these college campuses, because some of the very things that they say they hold dear in their heart are the very things, are the very freedoms that are not granted in these Middle Eastern countries, in places that Hamas reigns supreme, in places like Iran. They do not support many of these liberal ideas that they have. If they went over there preaching these liberal ideals, they would be met with probably execution.
Yeah, well, when you have countries so oppressive that they force women to wear long black dresses where their skin don't show, that's a problem. When they burn books that adults are supposed to read, that's a problem. Well, they don't allow other religions to function freedom in that society. That's a problem. Well, Israel has a more open society. Come on, don't kid yourself. I keep hearing about Israel's oppression. There's a lot more openness there than any other part of the Middle East.
Yes.
Anyway, point is, there's some people confused out there. We better learn to pick a side. I am not suggesting boots on the ground. I am not suggesting American involvement in this war. I am suggesting get out of Israel's way and let her do what she needs to do to secure her peace and prosperity. Now, that does not include genocide, but that's not what I'm seeing.
No.
I'm seeing the country defend itself as best it knows how under very, very difficult circumstances. If they push too far, then I'd be the first one to say, whoa, stop. But I haven't seen that yet. Have you?
No, it's not happening.
All right. I'll tell you something else is not happening. Control over the southern border. That's not happening. And now Miss Harris has decided she's going to go to Arizona. Did you see this?
I think I heard about it, but I hadn't seen much.
It's a PR stunt. It takes political cynicism to a whole new low. So 3.5 years, she's failed to do anything about the border.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden she takes off down to the water and she says, I'm here to solve the problem. And you see this refrain on social media all the time. After 3.5 years, you think she would have done something. She hasn't done anything. And so she rushes down there and they ask her what her plan is. And there's really no plan except to spend more money. And this is where it gets strange to me, is that it's okay to want to hire additional border agents, but I would think that's to keep people out. In other words, people that are doing it illegally. I don't think anybody in the world has a problem with illegal immigration. Do you?
No.
I don't have a problem
They
with it.
don't.
If somebody wants to come to this country and better their lives, and they're from another country, and they come here with skills, and they want to work, and they're not going to be a drain, come on.
Yeah.
Come on. If they're going to come over here and jump the border, and we don't know who they are, where they're from, or what criminal convictions they may have, that's another issue altogether. Harris seems to be inclined to just let them in and they'll figure it out later. That's not a very effective strategy. And some of this data is pretty alarming. Now, you might remember Trump criticized the open border policy. He says they're letting in mentally ill people and drug smugglers and sex traffickers. You've seen all that. Mm-hmm. Turns out the data, some of this stuff is really alarming. According to ICE, there's about 600,000 migrants with criminal records right now in American cities. 600,000. I don't know about you, that's a pretty big number. Among them, more than 15,000 that have been convicted or accused of homicide. 16,000 accused of domestic or assault. And it gets worse and worse and worse. So one of the representatives then calls ICE and says, listen, I need more documents. I want to drill down and try to figure out exactly how many non-law-abiding immigrants are in this country illegally. And listen to these numbers. 62,000 convicted of assault, 14,000 of burglary, 56,000 drug convictions, 2,500 kidnapping.
Wow.
Kidnapping. And her answer is, well, word salad. Not a lot we can do. That should be concerning. I want to talk about that for a second because this is one of the things that really always upsets me. And we've been talking about this for 20 years.
Yeah.
Every time we bring this issue up, we're accused of being racist or xenophobes.
That's accurate.
Furthest thing from the truth. I want to be clear about this. Some of the finest people I've ever met on this planet happen to be from South America and Mexico.
Absolutely, 100% agree.
Some of the finest, hardest working people I've ever met, with families that love this country and love their family and their religion, and they come here just to better their lives. Some of the best people I've ever met, period. Their culture is beautiful, they're warm, they're wonderful. That doesn't excuse illegal activity.
No.
We talked about this once before. If the first act you do in this country is to break its laws, it's probably not a good idea to be in a nation of laws.
No.
And we see that, so we try to stop that. And we're criticized for being somehow mean or hateful.
You know, and there's also protections in place for folks that are trying to flee an oppressive government. There are ways to work with them while they're going through that.
We have a broken system. There's no
Yes.
doubt about that. But the answer to a broken system is not an open border. The answer to a broken system is to correct the problems and to stem illegal immigration, first of all, but also any immigration that would bring to us other countries' convicts. Mm-hmm. It's a no-brainer, right?
Yes.
I mean, you think about all the data we've got and all the ability to ascertain data that we have, and we're literally letting folks in that have no business being out of jail.
Yeah.
That's a problem. And yet we're the bad guys. Now, meanwhile, MSNBC has a show, and I never thought someone could get away with something like this. I think you sent me this article. Did you read that about the MSNBC claims that Latinos are shifting toward the GOP because, now listen to this, quote, because they want to be white.
I saw that.
How do people get away with saying this stuff?
How is that not racist? I think I put, when I sent it to you, my question to you was, how is that not racist?
Well,
how is it we're always attacked as being racist? And they blatantly say something as racist as that.
It's overtly racist.
It's the same principle, Chris, when you go to, how many times do you hear when there is a conservative black person, what's the first thing they say? He's an Uncle Tom. He's a sellout. Yeah. You can't have a different opinion than them. Again, there's no tolerance on their side.
Well, let's talk about this for a second, because this is an MSNBC host that's making this comment. The founder of, looks like some media company. And they're pointing out that all of a sudden, where the Democrats used to have this massive control over Latino voters, that gap is narrowed to 14 points.
Yeah.
4 years ago this time, it was 29 points. And so there is a shift over. And I think I know what that shift's all about. I think because they are good people, and they do recognize the importance of security. They recognize the importance of good economies, right? They recognize the importance of job creation. And so that's why they came here after all. They didn't come to Mexico so we could become Mexico. They came to Mexico, they came to America so they could find jobs and prosperity. Yeah. And they recognize the best party for jobs and prosperity just happens to be the GOP. Not that I always agree with everything they do.
Not remotely.
But I think by far, when it comes to job creation, it's the best party. So they're shifting toward Trump, and it's causing the liberals to lose their minds. Turns out, she claims they're only doing that because they want to be white. How does she stay on the air? If you said something like that, even on this show, there'd be a boycott outside.
Absolutely, there would be.
But they say these things. I guess it's that old traditional. You know, if you're part of an oppressed society, you can say whatever you want to say. Well,
liberals have been very successful in shaming groups of people that decide that they don't want to go along with their liberal ideology. They will shame them, as I pointed out before with the black community, where they say any conservative black person, Uncle Tom, sellout. Yeah. They're attempting that now with the Latinos, it sounds like.
The thing this country needs more than anything else is to not create victims. Victimhood is one of the greatest dangers to this country. It doesn't matter where you're from or what your color is, what your religion is. As long as you're self-reliant and work hard, there ought to be a place for you if you're doing your job. But that's not what liberals do. They create victims because they need voters.
Yeah.
And one of the ways they've done that is through emotion. I want to get to that in a second, because last week I talked about how the females between 18 and 29 are becoming increasingly liberal in this country. And I mean, the gap is crazy. Just a few years ago, 10 years ago, they were roughly equally split between I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a conservative, I'm a liberal. Now they almost all, not all, let's just say Harris has a 29% advantage among among women. I think she's ranking up there about 67 or more percent in some respects. I want to talk about that after the break because I was curious after I talked about that. You know, what are they thinking? Where are they coming from? But what about men? What about young men? And I found the data.
Oh.
And as it turns out, young men are trending the other direction. What does this mean for future families? I have no idea. We'll talk about that after the break.
Escape to Pearl River Resort.
So a minute ago, I'm talking about this shift we've seen among young women. And that really alarms me because if the data shows the race is close now, and it's probably pretty close. This country is very polarized. It's very split. But we see a demographic that's really shifting one direction. You can do math. And in a few years, if you take that math and extrapolate it, you begin to see we're going to never lose. We're never going to win a race again at this rate, right? Because the young women are trending so aggressively toward the left. Now, that's 18 to 29. A lot of reasons for that. We talked about that on the last show. It could have been that, you know, Trump and Hillary, when they had that big fight, and he was kind of mean to Hillary. Maybe it hurt their feelings a bit. Maybe identity politics made it an us versus them scenario. I cannot for the life of me understand that. I don't care what sex the president is, as long as he or she is conservative.
I agree.
I've never understood this he versus she mentality, this black versus white mentality. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. Either you're conservative or you're not. This is a really simple calculation, right?
Issues should matter over any of that.
Issues should matter. But now the girls, the women, are shifting hard to the left. So I found a cool article in my research today trying to figure out what the boys were doing with the, not boys, 18 to 20, they're men. You get to be 18 years old, you're a man. You can fight for your country, you're a man. So these
Amen.
are men. What are these young men doing? 18 to 29, they're pushing our direction. Let's think about this though. Men, this is going to get me in trouble. It used to be being masculine was a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
Western society was filled with masculine stories of masculine men at relatively young ages doing pretty incredible things. Alexander the Great, he was 20 years old when he became king of Macedonia, 25 when he conquered Persia. Augustus, he was 17 when he inherited Julius Caesar's will. Charlemagne was 24. He became the undisputed king of the Franks at 24. Napoleon was 24 when he became a general in the French army. 24 years old, he's a general in the French army. Let me really blow your minds now. James Madison, remember the Declaration of Independence, that quaint document no one discusses anymore?
Yeah.
July the 4th, 1776. James Madison was just 25 years old. Alexander Hamilton, just 21 years old. James Monroe, 18. Christ himself was just around 30 when he did all of that amazing stuff. So Western civilization is filled with young men, aggressive, ambitious, strong, hardy, explorers, poets, patriots, eager for glory, ready to die if they needed to die, for immortality, determined that their names lived in history. These were men's. Think about it. Christian missionaries, explorers crossed oceans to bring the word of God, right?
Yeah.
Frontiersmen went out west facing nothing but hopes and dreams. Of course, the Democrats do that every day, hopes and dreams. They went out west facing hopes and dreams, and they did amazing things because we celebrated Western men. Hear what I said?
You did.
Masculinity was celebrated. Strength was celebrated. Our stories were celebrated. But something's happening. All that poetic poetry and glory from the masculine days of the West is being replaced. Is it not?
No, it 100%.
I mean, we don't talk about manly man things anymore. Now, sometimes in the sports arena, you still see it.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, it's kind of discouraged, isn't it?
It really is.
Have you seen that? Have you seen instances of that?
Chris, I did an episode of The Right Side just a couple of weeks ago where I talked about Hollywood and how it's moved away from, or how it's ruining franchises by forcing an agenda. And one of the things that they've done is, instead of the heroic alpha male hero, it's got to be the tough as nails female who can do everything the same, as good. No, not as good, better than the man.
But hear me out here. If I had a daughter, I would want her to be strong, aggressive, dynamic. I would teach her that the world is hers if she wants it. I would not want her to need a man for anything, but that's not what we're saying here.
No.
It's one thing to teach daughters to be strong, and you can do that without teaching men to be weak.
That's the point.
You can do that without teaching men to be weak. There's a place for masculinity. And so I started thinking about how it applies even to today's world. Look at speech. Just look at speech. And I'm going to give a crude, terrible example, but I think it's accurate. If I were to claim with a straight face that a biological man is a man, would that be met with scorn from the left?
Oh, it would 100, even though it's accurate.
Could I say that at a college campus without being ridiculed?
Absolutely not.
Scientifically, have I said anything inaccurate?
No, you're 100%
so
right.
Even the speech is changing. We're expected to indulge in this fantasy now because masculinity is bad. So I guess the word is emasculation. Maybe we're being emasculated. Maybe it's a process. You know, women are traditionally replacing roles of men in society. Again, nothing wrong with that, whatever. Knock yourselves out. But that doesn't mean that men still can't be men. Now you say, why are you talking about all this, McDaniel? Get to the point of the story. And this is the point of the story. These men, these young men, I think are sensing now this hostility. I think they're beginning to recognize they're up against something. They want to be strong. They want to live up to the archetype, the concept of warriors, right, and frontiersmen. Yeah. They want to be that, but they get these whispers in the press that that's crude, that's rude, that's not appropriate. Maybe that's one of the things driving them now back toward the right. Maybe they're sick of the nonsense. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing so many young men become conservative in light of the ridicule they're facing at school, at the universities, and on the job sites. Yeah. Let's not kid ourselves. I'm not trying to be hateful here, but a young man on a job site isn't exactly the most welcome guy anymore, is he?
No.
Okay? So, who are we and what's happening? You got the insiders. Those are the liberals. These are the corporate managers, the government bureaucrats, the academic administrators. You know who I'm talking about. Those are the insiders. They control the ball game. Then you have the outsiders, the folks in flyover country, right? Americans who are the result of their geography, their location, their economic status, their occupation. They're not the cool kids anymore. They're still fighting. They're still doing their jobs. They're still honorable people doing what they think is right to save this country. But they're the bad guys. These young people are seeing that now, and now we're starting to see a really sharp twist. It turns out the same thing that happened to ladies between 2015 and now also happened to men. We're just going the other direction. Men are becoming conservative. Isn't that something?
It's good.
Turns out now they're twice as likely to be conservative as they were just 10 years ago. Women are twice as likely to be liberal than they were just 10 years ago. That creates a neat and ultimately horrific future because I don't see how anybody would want to be married to someone who doesn't share at least some core beliefs. Now, don't get me wrong. We don't agree with people all the time on all issues. But politics is core beliefs here. I'm not sure I'd want my wife out there, shouting pro-Obama things in the middle of the night. I think I'd get a little fired up about that. But, I get it, whatever. I'm just saying there's a split here. The bigger question for this audience is, what now? If young men are going one direction, young women are going another direction, what does that look like politically in 10 more years? Is emotion driving this, feelings driving this, and fear driving the other side? Because if emotion's driving one and fear is driving the other, that really is a very difficult future. And if you allow emotions to dictate what the fear means for the rest of society, they're going to ostracize men even more. Because, those are barbarians, they're brutes, look at them, they can't be trusted. Where do we go from here?
I don't know, Chris, because again, you've seen men, the traditional man, in the sense of what we've always been taught, in the way that our fathers conducted themselves, you've seen that be portrayed as evil. You've seen that portrayed as bad. And now that we've seen that, again, of course, there's going to be hostility from young women because that's what they're being told. They're being pushed away from every traditional norm that we were taught as kids, that like your wife was taught as a kid. They're being told that's bad. Yeah. They're being told that, and again, this doesn't say they have to live their life according to a man. This is just saying that if it's okay for you to be feminine, it should be okay for a man to be masculine.
Yeah, I don't mind whatever a woman wants to do. I'm fine with that. Whatever a man wants to do, yeah. I'm fine with that. As long as you're adults. But I don't know why we would have to necessarily ostracize one to celebrate the other.
Yeah,
that's the argument, and I see it. And I'm worried about it because I have 2 boys. And when I'm teaching them to be men, we're talking about, in some respects, stereotypical things. I'll give you some examples. We box.
Yeah.
We wrestle. We shoot a lot of guns. We ride bicycles. We compete. Now, those are manly things. Now, they can be womanly things as well. I'm not suggesting that. Women are certainly welcome. But traditionally speaking, women typically they gravitate away from boxing unless they're transgender. Then they're in. You didn't catch that joke, did you?
I did.
Yeah, that's another problem. Whole other show. The point is this: I want my men to be masculine and strong, self-reliant and resilient, and yet, get this, kind and polite and reserved and protective. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Nothing. I guess someone would say, why do I need protection? Then you don't need one of my boys. That's fine. Nobody's saying you have to have protection. I'm just suggesting that male stereotype still has some relevance in today's society. Thank God for those strong soldiers today that protected Israel. Not to say the women didn't as well. They did. But let's not kid ourselves. Disproportionately, men are represented in the military forces, especially on frontline troops, more so than women. Not that any of this matters because Netflix is going broke. Did you hear?
I have not heard.
Yeah, it's news. It's not really going broke yet. They need to do a handful of foolish things before they go completely broke. But Netflix is, it turns out their their chairman, co-founder, his name is Reed Hastings, and apparently a pretty popular guy. He went to X a few days ago, and he decided to endorse Harris for president.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was, this was back in July, I guess, but the data's just now coming out. So I guess it was July 23rd. He goes, congrats to Harris. Now is the time to win. Well, that's interesting because right after that, a whole bunch of folks canceled their Netflix. And that goes to another point I want to make. And by the way, if you see me sinking over here and my chair is losing altitude, it's not me. I noticed that. It's not me. It's not the magic of television. My chair is literally sinking into the floor.
It's fun to watch in real time. I'm going to be honest.
Do you feel that? I'm still going down.
I see it.
I'm 6 or 7 seconds away from doing the show way down here. Probably improve ratings. Anyway, Hastings, turns out, longtime Democratic donor, gave $7 million to a pro-Harris super PAC. And 3 days after he wrote that was the single worst day for Netflix cancellations this year.
Wow.
Now, that leads me to a point I wanted to discuss because there's a reason. When you go to a big city, you're walking down the street, and everything seems so nuanced and sparkly and avant-garde and progressive.
Yes.
There's a reason for that. Progressives have money, and they're willing to spend on things and companies that support their agenda. And that's why everywhere you look is like it's like a DNC ad in every store, right? If conservatives ever could figure that out about the free market and begin to spend their money, like for example on chairs that don't sink like this, if they could spend their money.
But it's entertaining that your chair's sinking.
If they could spend their money or not spend their money based in some respects on the positions of some of these big corporations, you might just be shocked at how the corporations will stop some of this foolishness. But we're not like that. We're not very organized. B, we're naturally contrarian. So we can't seem to get a consensus on how to handle this. I would just suggest that, let's just say there's another shoe company that's just as good as a shoe company that's pushing propaganda. Why don't you shop it?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a tractor company.
Yeah.
Well, because there was a tractor company that did get DEI
I
inclusive.
saw that.
You see that?
I did.
And some of the farmers got a little ticked off. Good for them.
And they reversed course.
They reversed
quickly.
course. And so we need to find ways to leverage our economic might, how dimming that is presently with inflation, and figure out a way to do this because it does work. It does work. A few more things I want to talk about, Jack, while I'm sinking into the abyss. I'm going to try something here. Hey, listen, on my life, if I flip over on this thing and this goes on the internet, I'm done. I'm done. Who bought this chair? Why is this happening? One of the things I want to talk about, we don't have a lot of time. We have a few minutes, but have you seen this port strike?
I have, yes.
Now, I'm going to blow some people's minds about this because the headline here got my attention, and I didn't like the headline. Not because I don't want it to hurt Biden, but because Biden has nothing to do with this. Okay, look at the headline. What's it say? Say it.
Biden's port strike is going to be expensive and painful.
Now, I get we're trying to win a race, and I'm all in. But we don't have to make stuff up to win races.
Yeah.
Biden didn't cause this port strike. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about why I say that, because the next article is going to be something that we need to discuss, and that is I'm not sure that Americans fully understand what the power of the president really is anymore. That's going to be the last thing we talk about today. I think it's important. So as of midnight last night, port workers, East Coast, Gulf Coast, they reached a strike. And they did it because they had a contract. It was a 6-year contract with the United States Maritime Alliance, USMX. It ended, and so now these folks want better wages, and they want more compensation, kind of the same thing there. But they also are wanting protection from automation at ports. Yeah, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Not going to happen. But they are at least doing whatever it is they think they have to do to try to get better working conditions. Now, this is what got me interested about this story. Not so much the headline. It was this. The writer here goes completely bonkers talking about how this is going to cost us between $3.8 billion and $4.5 billion per day. And I was outraged.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of money. And I guess we all should be rightfully outraged. That's a lot of money. It's cost of the United States economy. And then I researched how much debt we accumulate each day in this country. It's double that. And no one says a word.
Nope.
Do you see where we are as a country right now? Our priorities are all messed up. Now, I get nobody wants this strike to go forward, but those workers certainly have every right to strike. Do they not?
They do.
They do. It's called freedom of association. You have every right to join with your coworkers and try to get better conditions for your collective agreements. Okay? Now, you may not like it, but that's America. And it would be wrong if we outlawed it because that would go against a conventional freedom, would it not?
It would.
But at the same time, I'm mad, but shouldn't we be more mad about the debt, which is causing double the damage each day than this port strike is?
Absolutely, because the debt's going to be more damning to the future of this country.
This leads to my last point for today before my chair sinks into the floor. Biden did not necessarily cause the port strike. Now, I know if you're playing, 6-degree chess and you want to... Have you ever seen the movies where they're trying to find the serial killer and they're in a room and they've got all this string everywhere and they're trying to...
Oh, yeah.
connect
We
the
all
dots?
have. Yeah.
Well, that's what you have to do to blame Biden for a port strike. Okay? Now, I get it. I don't like him either, but there are some things he caused and some things he didn't. Last story, or last concept today. When did the president get to be a genie or a king or a dictator?
I hadn't seen that happen.
Well, I mean, we think they are. Do Americans even understand what the role of the president is under the Constitution?
No, I don't think the average American does.
And now, listen, I'm only saying that because we're blaming Biden for a port strike, and if Trump gets in, they're going to blame him for bird flu,
Yep.
or whatever the case may be. There's always going to be a blame for the president, no matter what they do. Why? Let's consider this. Presidents are not saviors. They're not mythical figures. They can't single-handedly solve problems. They can't lower gas prices by by snapping their fingers. The economy, it's difficult. It runs in cycles. They can't provide child care. They can't create jobs. You know, it's like politicians in Mississippi. Every time a plant moves in, they want to go take a picture in front of it so they created jobs.
I did this. I brought this to you.
Government doesn't create jobs.
Yeah.
They never have. They never will. Politicians don't create jobs. They want you to think they create jobs. You know what creates jobs? Hard-working people with money.
Yep.
Capital. If you've ever wondered why it is we want people to retain the money they earn, it's because you'll be surprised. They'll use that money to create jobs. Unlike politicians, they'll just take the money and misspend it. Big distinction there. But here's the thing. This expansive view of the presidency, if the founding fathers saw this today, they would be absolutely appalled. It is nothing like they envisioned. The truth of the matter is a president, his job is very limited. He's controlled by checks and balances, controlled by the Constitution. Now, how do we know this? I'm going to challenge you, okay? Go to Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. It literally lists the presidential powers. I don't see health care in here.
You mean it's right there in
Wait,
the
I don't
founding
see.
document?
I don't see health care in here. I don't see gas prices in here.
No.
I don't see hunger in here. Here are the powers of the president as outlined specifically in the Constitution. Commander-in-Chief of the military. But get this, he can't declare war.
Nope, not without
Very
Congress.
limited. He can grant pardons and reprieves for federal offenses. He can negotiate treaties, but he can't enter treaties. Only the Senate can enter a treaty. He can nominate judges or ambassadors. His biggest responsibility, faithfully execute the laws passed by Congress. That's it. That's it. There's nothing, and we've created these presidents now. We think we have that this guy can either can solve every problem or cause every problem. It's a common theme for this show. We always complain. We ignore every other election. Mm-hmm. Our congressman can be a crook. Our city councilman can be a lunatic. Our state senator can be a wacko. But if we just win the presidency, we think everything's fine.
Oh, it's going to fix everything.
But he can't. He can't. He's very, very limited in what he can do. And that's the big trap we always fall into. Untold millions, if not billions of dollars spent. We win, and we hope we do, but it's just one office out of hundreds, if not thousands, of other additional offices. Now, the founders, they told us what to think of federal power, especially executive power. Now, you listen to this. James Madison, he knew a thing or two about the Constitution, didn't he?
You think?
He's the father of the Constitution, right? He warned the dangers of combining the powers into one office or multiple offices. He says the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, is tyranny. Isn't that what we're creating with the presidency right now?
Kind of is.
Federalist number 69, Alexander Hamilton. He contrasted the American president with a monarch, saying the president's powers are limited, much weaker than a king, focused on enforcing laws rather than making laws. But we've gotten away from that. The contemporary view is that he has to solve all the problems. Now, here's the problem with that. It shifts responsibility away from us. Mm-hmm. Hear me out. We're not supposed to worship a politician, no matter who he is. The government is supposed to be ours, of the people, by the people, ours. And when we focus so much on one office, it shifts the responsibility away from us, away from the states. We don't look to local leaders. We don't look to ourselves to solve these problems. We look for some guy in Washington 1,000 miles away to solve the problem. That is antithetical to everything the American founders wanted. Yet here we are. By the way, how do we know how bad it's gotten? George Washington, when he was president, he had 4 cabinet members. 4.
Wow.
You know what they were? State, Treasury, War, and the Attorney General. There are 15 now, ranging from education to the housing and urban development. And each one has considerable power, unlike the ones Washington had. And they interfere with our lives just about daily. So here's the thing. I'm not trying to be too preachy about this, but if you value the Constitution, then you have to value limited government. If you value limited government, then you can't be a fan of a strong executive, because that's the most tyrannical and threatening office in the country.
Yep.
If you know that, you can't put all your hopes and dreams in that single office, because it can't fix everything. And if it could, we are truly in trouble. Meanwhile, Congress keeps spending. Meanwhile, Congress keeps insider trading. Meanwhile, Congress keeps holding hearings and doing nothing to solve any problems. And meanwhile, you folks are going to keep electing them time and time and time again, ignoring the real problem, which is right in your back door. Was that bad?
No, I think you're onto something here.
I think I'm onto something too. And it's not just the short chair.
It looks like you kind of minimalized the shrinking, so maybe
So
maybe you
frustrating.
stopped something, but it was entertaining while it lasted.
So bloody frustrating. I guess now that I'm done ranting, I want to point out one more thing before we go. Lord, when did we stop reading the Constitution?
Oh, that's
And
a great question.
at what point did we get so caught up in us versus them that both sides said, you know what, forget about it?
I think it's deliberate. I think that it's not taught in the schools anymore, and I think that's deliberately so that people will not understand what their rights are, so that way people will not understand what their liberties are, so that way when they're snatched from them, stolen away from them, they don't understand it, so they don't know to fight for them.
Well, let me tell you one more problem with the concept of an all-powerful executive, a president. When it's our guy, we love it.
Yep.
But it won't always be our guy.
Nope.
And I, for one, don't want to live under a king. I
No.
want to be free. I want to be left alone. And the only way to do that is to respect the separation of powers, both vertically and horizontally, and to make sure that individuals ultimately have control of their own lives, to make sure the individuals are the ones that take care of the community's problems, and not to look to Washington, D.C. to solve these problems. The other night, I saw Civil War for the first time.
I still haven't watched it.
It's not great, but it's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in the middle. But part of it was kind of sad. But part of it, you start thinking, man, could this happen? And the answer is, in any republic, in any country, anything's possible. But we're supposed to have these foundational principles that keep us from going down paths like that.
Mm-hmm.
A nice, healthy distrust of politicians and power, not to put all your eggs in one basket, not to worship any one politician, no matter who they may be, Reagan or not. The idea is to always put the power back in the hands of the people.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you won't have disruptions. You won't have civil wars. In fact, one thing we could do to solve all of these problems is just to empower the states and allow them to respectfully govern themselves. Still have the feds for foreign policy and affairs, and still have the feds to help trade, whatever the case may be, but the states allow them to handle their domestic institutions themselves. Now we have peace in our time. Nobody's mad. But nope, everybody wants that power. Too much money in Washington, too many lobbyists, too many free football games to go to, Jack. They won't give it up without a fight. And I'm afraid that's where it's coming.
Yeah.
In any event, crazy show. I'm tired. I'm 6 inches shorter than I was when I started. But I enjoyed it.
It was fun tonight.
Thank you all for being here. Jack, thank you as always for being here.
Thank
This
you.
has been Chris McDaniel's America on the Midnight Ride Network, your home of the anti-establishment movement in this country. We'll see you next time.
Escape to Pearl River Resort.